Today's agricultural fact of the day also came from an article that was published sometime yesterday afternoon on Ag Daily, and it actually is contradicting the information that I provided yesterday. And I find this very interesting because I really wonder if all of these things are intertwined and that there's not an underlying issue with all of these plant closures and the recommendation to not consume red meat. And there's a few other things, but I will let you decide. So today's agricultural fact: the Federal Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee has recommended a reduction in red and processed meat consumption as part of its 2025 scientific report. This report emphasizes health equity and sustainable dietary practices and is intended to function as a guide for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the USDA. The report recommends higher intakes of vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, whole grains, seafood, and unsaturated fats, and lower intakes of red/processed meats, refined grains, and added sugars. Now, I do know that there are some people that will literally live and unalive on the hill that red meat is not healthy for you. However, there have been other studies from unbiased sources that have proved otherwise, and it is a very nutrient-dense source. I've cut this fact short because I got a little carried away in my introduction to agriculture class, and their fact was actually like 2 paragraphs in length, and I'm having an inner battle here. In a large part of our discussion, when it comes to health equity, what exactly does that mean? Because I was just talking to my students, many of which are finding themselves in this situation. I'm sure that kids that are in our school every single day, their families are struggling. And with the current economy, when you go into the grocery store, you buy the cheapest options that will be able to provide adequate nutrients to your family. And I just explained to them, things in the grocery store, the prices look drastically different than they did a few years ago. And unless you're shopping at Aldi's, when you go in and look at the fruits and vegetables that are available, it's not exactly cheap. So they're advising, and the other thing are like legumes, beans and lentils. Okay, those are cheap, but they're not really palatable. And another thing that the kids brought up was with vegetables, if you are cooking them in preparation, because some people just don't find raw vegetables palatable, you're adding other things to them, like butter, and butter is expensive. And I'm not saying that beef is cheap, because it's not. But when you look at the nutrient values that the items you're putting in your grocery cart can provide, that is a nutrient-dense source that is available at a relatively reasonable price when you compare it to calories that you are getting from other sources and comparing it to the nutrients that it is providing. This entire report just makes me wonder if there is an underlying issue or an underlying situation that they are trying to not force on us. However, the end of this article also stated that they did a study and found that households aren't actually following the dietary guidelines. So they also advise that scientists from both ends of the spectrum, let me find the actual word. The U.S. population does not meet dietary guidelines to address the persistent gap between recommendation and actual intakes, meaning what they're recommending versus what the households are actually consuming. The committee urges HHS and USDA to convene scientists with diverse expertise in behavioral, implementation, and communication services to evaluate the science of dietary behavior change and make evidence-based recommendations for strategies. So basically, they're like, okay, the US population overall doesn't have a lot of self-control and they're going to eat whatever they want to eat, and it doesn't matter what our guidelines say. So we need to figure out how to effectively get them to want to follow these guidelines. I think each family has their own struggles when it comes to food security. And of course, there are specific sectors of people, right? The middle class, lower class. And one thing I mentioned was people that are receiving government assistance may have more availability when it comes to selecting products that they are able to afford and purchase because somebody else is covering that bill. Now, I'm not saying that large families that have to be on food stamps because of economic strain don't struggle, but I can tell you the lower middle class is really struggling right now to make ends meet and to be able to survive and pay bills. And the entire article and then you have the people at the federal level saying, I don't understand why our citizens don't follow our dietary guidelines and why we're dealing with obesity and all these health issues. Well, many, many years of eating crap, because that's what our government has allowed, unlike other countries. We have obesity, we have children that are living sedentary lifestyles and not being active and burning those calories. But again, I'm just a lowly egg teacher, so what do I really know? But again, this is provided to my students to help get them to understand and comprehend some things and maybe inspire them to do their own research, which is also why I post this on social media, to try and get people to think a little bit more critically about the food that they're consuming and our food system in general.